Welcome to Global Connections with Robert Siegel, Navigating the New Normal, presented by the American Friends of Rabin Medical Center. Our monthly Leaders Forum addresses vital issues facing society and the economy, real estate and technology, medicine and science. My name is Dr. Joshua Plout. I'm the Executive Director of American Friends of Rabin Medical Center, AFRMC, a 501c3 National American charitable organization based in New York City. We at AFRMC represent Israel's premier hospital, Rabin Medical Center in Petach Tikva in Greater Tel Aviv, the leading institution named in honor of Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin. The hospital is a model of coexistence. It serves 1 million patients annually from all ethnic and religious backgrounds with the same compassionate care. We would like to share an overview of the work being done at the Rabin Medical Center.
Rabin Medical Center, located nearby Tel Aviv, is one of Israel's largest and most advanced academic hospitals, named after former Israeli Prime Minister and Nobel Prize winner for Peace Yitzhak Rabin. Comprising Bellinson and Hasharon campuses, it has been a national leader in medicine, science, and compassion towards patients since its founding in 1936. As the flagship hospital of Israel's largest healthcare provider, Clalit, with more than 8,200 dedicated staff members, RMC gives treatment to around 1 million patients every year, performs more than 70% of all organ transplants, and provides healthcare to every 6th cancer patient in the country. RMC is a home for internationally acclaimed centers of excellence, including Davidoff Cancer Center, Samueli Institute for Cancer Research, and a new brain and heart center, the Tower of Hope. Through groundbreaking research, AI-driven medicine, cutting-edge technologies, and global collaborations, RMC is redefining what is possible in modern healthcare. In moments of peace and in times of war, we stand on the front line. As a main trauma center, RMC is healing soldiers and civilians, reuniting families, and strengthening the Israeli social fabric and resilience. Delivering not only world-class treatment, but also human connection, healing, and hope. Rabin Medical Center, a beacon of innovation, excellence, and care.
Our host and moderator for Global Connections is Robert Siegel, former host of All Things Considered on National Public Radio for 31 years. Over the course of an hour each month, Global Connections features guests who Robert Siegel interviews as they explore important issues in our world. And now, on to today's program.
Thank you, Josh. It has been a remarkable season in Washington, D.C. In the first year of his second term, which is constitutionally his last term, President Trump has held the Republican majorities in both houses of Congress together to pass a domestic agenda in one huge, he would say big and beautiful bill. Its centerpiece, of course, was tax cuts. Since then, he has appeared more interested in foreign affairs than domestic affairs. We have witnessed some huge protests against him, also the longest shutdown of the federal government, and a Democratic sweep in the November elections. Republicans in the House have defied the president over release of the Epstein papers, and Senate Republicans have so far refused to budge on changing their rules, which include the filibuster rule. That means that even though Republicans enjoy a small majority in the Senate, they still need Democratic senators to put together 60 votes to end debate and pass a bill. Where are we headed? What are the decisions facing Trump and the Democrats in Washington? And as the Democrats, as we count down to the midterm elections of 2026, what challenges does the economy confront both parties with, and how might they respond? These are big questions, and we have some very able panelists to address them. I'll interview each of the panelists, and then they'll all take part in a question and answer session. And if you're viewing us live, you can join by submitting a question using the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. Later, we'll hear from economist and financial analyst Abby Joseph Cohen, but we'll start with our two political journalists. I've assigned each a political party to talk about in this series of one-on-one interviews. And in a few minutes, I'll ask E.J. Dionne to talk about the Democrats. We start with Tamara Keith to talk about the Republicans. Tam is senior White House correspondent for NPR, long may it live, and host of the NPR Politics podcast. She joins us today from Salt Lake City. Tam, thanks for joining us. It's always good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you too.
Let's talk about the occupant of the White House. If you had to sum up what the White House political strategies and policies, what the point of them are right now, what would you say?
President Trump has come into office in his second term motivated to move very quickly to bend the country to his will in every possible way, from politics to sports to anything else you can possibly think of. And he has blown past not just norms this term, he has blown past laws and sort of taken the position of, well, sue me. And as you know, there have been a lot of lawsuits and a lot of court challenges that are still working their way through. But all the while, the president is really asserting as much executive power and authority as he possibly can. He would say that he's out there keeping the promises he made in the campaign. But he's also keeping some of the promises more than others, and he has clearly put a premium on retribution, which we've seen in any number of realms. And what we're seeing now is that there actually can be a consequence to, governing only for the base or governing for only part of America, and really just keeping focus on keeping those promises and keeping a focus on the base. And what results from that is, like, right now, there's a new NPR PBS News Marist poll that finds the president is at his lowest approval rating since right after January 6th. He's at 39% in this poll. It's not great. And even his supporters are saying, sir, we want you to focus on making things more affordable. When he, right after he was elected, he did an interview with Meet the Press, and he said that he was basically elected on two things: immigration and groceries. And groceries have not been fixed. No matter what he says, things are not cheaper. Some things are. Eggs are cheaper, but beef is not. Other things are not. And his tariff policies have contributed to that. And there is blowback.
I mean, given that this president has an interest in demonstrating and retaining power in itself, it must be the worst news possible to think that members of Congress might start regarding him as what every second-term president is, which is effectively, at some point, a lame duck.
Yeah, and I think that I think that the way he has sort of stormed into office the second time around is partially an acknowledgement that he has very limited time. He has limited time where he has this this control over the Congress where members of the House and the Senate are just not pushing back, and where he can just sort of like blow through and do what he wants to do. But he is time limited by 2028, time limited by the midterms. And I think one of the reasons that, just a few weeks ago, he was very openly entertaining the idea of running again in 2028 or somehow continuing to be president past January 20th, 2029, is that he was trying to avoid being perceived as a lame duck. In so many ways, power comes from appearing powerful. And if people are afraid of him, and this is the way he's governed the whole time, you know, he has gotten Congress to do what he wants, because if they don't, he will try to destroy these members of Congress. You look at any of the people who've crossed him since he first came into office, most of them are retired Republicans at this point. But now he's openly threatening legislators in Indiana, saying, I'll primary you, I'll get you out of there if you don't do this redistricting. And it's not clear if he has as much sway as he had even 3 weeks ago. I think that the president has sort of changed his tune a little bit since those elections in Virginia and New Jersey and elsewhere, because he suddenly just didn't look as powerful. His endorsement didn't help those candidates.
As I said, he has spent a lot of time engaged in foreign policy, which is it's typical of a lot of second-term presidents. He's been deeply involved in Middle East diplomacy, Middle East war fighting as well, and these attacks on boats offshore of Venezuela and Colombia, claiming that they're bringing drugs into the United States. He's positioned an aircraft carrier down there. If we put all this together with the occasional, musing about maybe intervening in Nigeria, does some kind of Trump doctrine emerge from his various actions and interests?
Yeah, I think it's hard to find a clear Trump doctrine. I think that one thing that does emerge is that he is a big fan of one-offs. He doesn't believe in nation building. He doesn't believe in long-term commitments. I think that the strikes on the Iranian nuclear program are a perfect example of, he goes in, he approves this, it happens, he immediately claims victory and complete obliteration before it's exactly clear whether there was complete obliteration, and then he moves on. And that is really the way he likes to operate, prefers to operate. He doesn't, there isn't like a huge detailed plan involved, as much as President Trump governs by instinct. And so what that means is he has a feeling about certain leaders, and based on how he feels about people, his policy will change. And he really just goes with his gut on so many things. I interviewed John Bolton, who, of course, former national security advisor to President Trump in the first term, obviously on the outs with the president and is now facing prosecution. But I interviewed him a few months ago, asking him about the Trump doctrine. And he said, it's really just an archipelago of dots. Like, you can try to connect the dots if you want, but President Trump isn't connecting the dots. That was his view, having done foreign policy with and for President Trump.
I just want to ask you about Republicans on Capitol Hill. I mean, the Republican Party has been trying to undo Obamacare, or the Affordable Care Act, for a decade now, I guess, and it's been kept alive by, at one point it was John McCain, at a later point it was Chief Justice Roberts. If in fact the assistance to people seeking insurance in the exchanges is not restored, if there is no correction of that, it'll be a huge blow to the Affordable Care Act. Is there some alternative among Republicans to Obamacare? Is there some better idea that they think they're pushing?
It's coming in 2 weeks. Uh, what I mean is, it's been 2 weeks.
It's always 2 weeks away, you're saying.
It's always 2 weeks away. It's been 2 weeks away for more than 8 years. And, what the president is saying now is that he wants, instead of these subsidies to go to insurance companies, he wants them to go directly to consumers. It's not clear how the mechanism for that would work, whether it would be more or less expensive, and it's not clear that there are the votes there for it. This has just been a real morass for Republicans, because that you can't just repeal, you have to replace, and they have not been able to come up with a satisfactory replacement that they can all agree on, in part because I think there's pretty strong disagreement within the Republican Party, sort of between the populist side and the more fiscally conservative side, about what the purpose and role of the government is.
Yeah. Tam, thank you for doing this once again. And stick with us, because we'll have the question and answer session in a little while. But right now, we're going to turn to E.J. Dionne, who is contributing opinion writer to the New York Times. E.J. is the author of many books about politics. For many years, he was a political columnist for the Washington Post, and he knows politics the way a scholar knows a discipline and the way a reporter knows a beat. I've asked him to talk with us in this one-on-one interview about what's ahead for the Democrats. EJ, thank you for joining us.
It's delightful to be with you.
Well, first, I want to ask you about how you see the health of the Democratic Party. Are the Democrats right now the champions of November who scored all these landslides, or are they a party riven by differences between moderates and progressives and about to form their traditional circular firing squad, as they used to say?
I think all of the above.
All of the above.
But I think that less the latter now than the former. If we'd had this conversation, say, 2 months ago, I think the conversation would, just based on the facts, would be a bit gloomier for Democrats. They do have a real argument going on about, which direction should they go in, how to get a majority again, what kind of presidential candidate they should run. But a couple of things have happened that have significantly increased Democrats' confidence and morale. Some of them Tam just described. The President Trump polling is terrible right now. He is, according to The Economist, has lost more ground more quickly than any recent president. They have the results of November's mini election cycle, if you will, where everywhere you looked in the country, the Democrats gained ground. They won the two marquee races in Virginia and New Jersey, with the Democratic candidates running well ahead of where Kamala Harris ran against Donald Trump a year ago. They are both Democratic states. But the Democratic candidates, Abigail Spanberger, the governor-elect of Virginia, and Mikey Sherrill, the governor-elect of New Jersey, really made inroads in places where Democrats had lost a lot of votes. Sherrill did particularly well in Latino areas. It looked like a complete snapback of the gains that Trump had made among Latinos, a snapback back to the Democratic Party. Also evidence that younger men who had been split in the last election and had been significantly less Democratic than earlier cohorts of young men were moving back. In Virginia, Spanberger saw some of those gains, but in particular gained a lot of votes in rural areas, which have been swinging very hard against Democrats. And then you had Zohran Mamdani's victory as a Democrat in New York. That's kind of a special case since both leading candidates were Democrats there. But then you had a lot of other races around the country, the California referendum on redistricting, which was overwhelmingly for new maps that'll help Democrats. Very important judge races in Pennsylvania. Why should somebody in Israel care about judges in Pennsylvania? Well, judges play a big role in fights over elections, as we saw after January 6th. If these three Democrats had lost these elections, the court would have been split and incapable of intervening. So all of that has put Democrats in a good mood. And we can get to the shutdown, which is complicated, but just to jump ahead, their victory in this fight over releasing the Epstein files, the very rich gentleman who was committed suicide in prison, involved in pedophilia, involved with a lot of influential people. Trump had promised, I'll release the Epstein files, and then his Justice Department turned around and said, nothing to see here. A whole campaign was mounted, particularly by survivors, people who, as teenagers, teenage women had been taken down there, very young women had been taken down there to Epstein's Island. And three Republicans broke with the party to force a vote on the release of the Epstein files. And the entire Republican Party, including Donald Trump, had to concede. We could talk about the whole issue or not, but what was really important here is you really hadn't seen a circumstance in which Donald Trump had been forced to back down because of something Congress did.
But let me ask you a question, EJ. If you mentioned the two camps in different directions. One of them is just, it's politically strategic, which is, are you trying to win over people who are in the middle and might have voted Republican, or is there so much low turnout among natural Democratic constituencies that you just excite them more and you can win that way? But in terms of projects and issues and programs, what is the difference between the Democratic progressives and the Democratic moderates? Is it between Medicare for all and let's restore the ACA to where we were? How do you describe the gap between these two wings of the party?
You know, it's a really good question you ask, because in certain ways there are policy differences like the one you just pointed to that define them. I think that one way to look at it is that the sort of Democratic left, both sides, by the way, believe the Democrats have to win more votes from the working class. They've been hemorrhaging working class votes, not unlike, by the way, social democratic parties in Europe. The center believes that the way to win back that working class is with more cultural moderation, to push aside cultural issues around transgender, to maintain support for civil rights, but but put aside what some call wokeism. That's their recipe primarily for winning back the working class. The left of the party says that the way to win back the working class is to be much tougher on big corporations, much tougher on millionaires and billionaires, if I may channel Bernie Sanders with a poor imitation of his accent, and to really stress corporate power, monopoly, and to put heavy stress on economic issues. Again, I think that sometimes these differences are exaggerated. If you take Mamdani, who is certainly on the Democratic left, he's a Democratic socialist. He is progressive on the social issues, but in his campaign for mayor, he did what the center said a candidate should do. He ran almost entirely on economic issues. He didn't run very hard on social issues. If you look at all three candidates, the big three races, Spanberger, Sherrill, and Mamdani, they all ran on affordability, on prices. So some of this is real, and some of it is just a general sense of who you are and who you identify with. And so these fights continue in the party. But I think that the alternative to the fight, which gained ground after this election, is different kinds of Democrats are going to win in different kinds of places. Mamdani could not get elected governor of Virginia. I think Abigail Spanberger could get elected mayor of New York, but the party, the party in New York is more to the left, and Mamdani can win in a place like New York, and in a way he can in Virginia.
EJ, stick with us because we're going to have the Q&A session in a few minutes. But thank you for that, and we're now going to speak with our third panelist. The Democrats rode deep dissatisfaction with the economy to landslide victories in this year's elections. The administration has responded by insisting that the economy is strong, but that people have been conned by TV news anchors to think otherwise. Complicating this discussion is a question that our third panelist, Abby Joseph Cohen, is especially concerned about. Republicans have defended their message by attacking the messengers who contradict them. In September, Trump fired the leadership of the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and the next month there was no jobs report. Abby Joseph Cohen says she's worried about the lack of good data. For many years, she directed investment strategy at Goldman Sachs on Wall Street, and she's now a professor at Columbia Business School. Abby, it's always good to talk with you, and it's good to see you.
Thank you, Robert.
Explain to us how important is good, politically neutral government data, and how dangerous is a threat to that quality of information?
Yeah, just the facts, ma'am, only the facts.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that we're facing as a nation is an absence of data, and in some cases, the abject disappearance of data. We're certainly seeing it in my area, which has to do with economics and what's happening not just in the US economy, but our relationships with other economies. We're also seeing it in scientific data, and that is really very, very troubling. With regard to the economic data, there has been, dare I say it, a Republican war on the facts as it relates to the economy for several years now. And by the way, the Democrats didn't really fix the problem. Several Republican administrations cut back our spending in categories like the Bureau of Labor Statistics. You may recall the way they tried to short circuit the collection of census data during the first Trump administration. And what we've seen more recently has to do with dramatic cutbacks at all of the data collection agencies. And of course, they were shut down, many of them, during the so-called government shutdown, even though they didn't need to be. Relative to the size of the federal budget, these numbers are a pittance of what we spend. Now, why is it important? Because we cannot reconstruct the missing data. We'll never be able to figure out what the consumer price index was in the months that are missing, for example. And why is this important? For the non-investment people on this call, keep in mind the following. It is US inflation data that forms the basis of interest rates in the United States. For example, Treasury yields, one could argue the single most important metric of interest rates, comes right off the CPI. And it is the US Treasury yield that's used as the benchmark for all other yields in the United States. And oh, by the way, also for yields on the sovereign debt of other nations. So if you don't have the CPI, and or you have politicians telling you what they think the CPI should have been, then we have some real areas of concern and uncertainty in the financial markets, and that doesn't help anyone.
We're in a very peculiar situation in terms of the in terms of the stock market. Let's start there. If you own stocks or mutual funds that own stocks, you've been seeing your nest egg grow dramatically over the past few years. However, that's been powered by a very small number of companies, and it's basically been powered by the promise of artificial intelligence. And I can't ever remember there being a time when, and perhaps it's just a problem of being old, but when the major factors in the economy and when people talk about the economic outlook are artificial intelligence and in some way cryptocurrency, two things which I find both esoteric. I mean, I don't understand either one really, and I would be kind of unable to explain why they succeed or why they fail. What do you make of that?
These are two categories that are very much like string theory. People say they understand it, but they can't explain it. Yeah. And the reality, Robert, is this. We have a so-called K-shaped economy in which there are some things that have performed extraordinarily well. That is that upward piece of the K. And then there are others that have done quite poorly. And what we basically see is that consumers in the middle or below are not doing well. Their cost of living has increased, their wages haven't kept up, and so they are basically feeling even more poor than they might have done previously. Yet it is the people on the upswing, particularly the very high reaches, the top quintile, for example, where we see that inflation-adjusted compensation has been rising. And as you point out, they benefit from what's happening in the financial markets. Now, what's happening in the financial markets is a little bit hard to understand. At the peak, just a few trading sessions ago, AI-related stocks, Mag 7 stocks, and so on, their total weight in the overall stock market, as measured by the S&P 500, was approximately 40% of total. That really is staggering, and it's an indication of heavy concentration. That's great on the upside. It may not be so great on the downside. Now, part of this has to do with the enthusiasm that some people say they have for AI, and it's not just the companies that produce the software or the chips. It's also the electric utility companies that are providing the power. And there is an interconnection that we need to be concerned about vis-a-vis concentration. So, for example, we know that some of the AI companies own very large pieces of their customers and their suppliers. And we also know that some of the chip companies are in fact lending money to their customers so the customers can buy more. This is what the Japanese might have referred to years and years ago as this interconnected economy across holdings. And those cross holdings drove the Tokyo Stock Exchange to record high PE ratios. And then, of course, it all came tumbling down. I'm not saying that our market is near those levels of valuation, but it is something to be thinking about.
When we spoke the other day, though, you said there are things reminiscent now of 2006, 2007, where people knew there was something wrong with the subprime mortgage market, but they assumed that it was limited. It was confined to a relatively small space of the economy, and there could be a collapse of it, and other institutions wouldn't be undone. Wrong. Things were much more connected than that, you say.
Absolutely. And the point here really is connectedness. And if things are very connected, they're very hard to control. So, for example, the work that was done in 2005, 2006, at the Federal Reserve and other places said that the subprime mortgage market was just about 12 or 15% of total mortgages. And by the way, remember, we also had what were called subprime auto loans. And what everyone forgot is that it wasn't just that 12 or 15%, it was the fact that there were banks connected to it, and those banks and other financial institutions had used leverage. And when we take a look at financial markets today, one of my concerns has to do with some of the so-called private asset categories, private equity, private credit, where we don't really know how much this is worth, but we do know there's an awful lot of money going into these categories. And when that happens, when a portfolio manager takes in a lot of money and is being paid to manage it, they're going to find things to buy, to put into that portfolio, and sometimes those opportunities are not what they might have been earlier in a market cycle.
Can lawmakers and regulators in Washington at least feel confident that the response to the Great Recession was sufficient reforms of regulations so that we're not looking at a potential collapse of Wall Street?
There were a number of regulations, Robert, that were put in place that are now in the process of being watered down. Now, maybe some of them should be eased up a little bit. For example, some might argue that the capital requirements for the best quality banks, maybe those don't need to be so tight. But at the same time, we have seen that the Consumer Financial Protection Board has been dismantled. It had been created as part of the aftermath of the financial crisis, which led to the Great Recession, and it was housed in the Federal Reserve. It's no longer there protecting consumers. The other thing that I look at is what small regional banks are doing, and what about the FHFA? This is the umbrella organization for Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, and they're having discussions about whether cryptocurrency can be used for collateral on mortgages. Well, I don't know about anybody else listening to this call. I don't know how much a cryptocurrency is worth, and I know that it is volatile, and that's typically not what you want when you're providing collateral for something as important as a middle-income home.
Abby Joseph Cohen, thank you so much for joining us once again. And stay with us right now because I want to bring back Tam and EJ and talk with both of you. Tamara Keith, first, why don't I ask you, from what you've heard from your fellow panelists, what strikes you as most interesting or that you have something to add to or comment on?
Oh, well, Abby is bringing back all of my former business correspondent memories and covering the financial crisis in 2008. And I just got an email from my mortgage guy saying, great news. Mortgages don't now require you to have a credit score or a good credit score. You can get a mortgage without a credit score. And I do wonder if our memories are too short.
Good question. EJ, things you've heard that you'd care to remark on?
I could listen to Abby talk about the economy for hours, and her nervousness matches mine. But I always say that I have predicted 2 of the last 10 downturns, so I tend to listen to nervous part of the presentation. I do want to underscore something Abby said that's so important. I hope she forms a bipartisan coalition for good data. It's something no one ever talks about. James Q. Wilson, the great neoconservative political scientist, wrote many years ago that one of the single most useful things government does is collect large-scale, honest, reliable data. This is good for policy. It's good for understanding the country. It's very good for business. Businesses use and need government data. So I appreciated that point very much. Just on Abby's point on crypto, I think that this administration has made a gigantic bet on crypto, and there's a crypto deregulation bill, a crypto regulation bill that's kind of opening the door to it. This makes a lot of people very nervous for the reasons Abby said, and I just wonder how we will think about this in 5 years. It does feel a bit like what craziness that started happening in the derivatives market, only even more fundamental because it unmoors currency from government altogether. It's a fascinating and it could become a scary thing. But
it's
Abby,
also linked. I'm sorry.
If you're more confident in crypto, please tell me.
Yeah, it's also linked to crony capitalism, which is always worrisome. And at the same time, we have seen a weakening of the Securities and Exchange Commission. And this combination isn't really a very good combination in terms of stability of financial markets.
Well, we didn't talk about the war of righteous gerrymandering, but here's a question from a viewer, from Jonathan Beich, who asks, what might be the effect of the federal court ruling against the Texas legislature's redistricting plan or other, let me leave it there, or for that matter. Who wants to, Tam or EJ? Which one of you? Tam?
I'll go first, and then EJ can fix whatever I say. But yeah, this has been fascinating because President Trump is the one who really kicked this off, demanded that Texas do this redistricting, demanded that other states do redistricting. California's ballot measure passed, even though the state had voted overwhelmingly in the past to create a nonpartisan commission. But it passed with the explicit argument that they were counteracting what Texas did. And now, if this ruling out of Texas stands, and it certainly is going to be appealed, but if that stands, then Republicans could come out behind. There are still a few states. The president, as I mentioned before, has been applying a lot of pressure to Indiana lawmakers to try to do gerrymandering there. Florida is another option. But then on the Democratic side, there are other options too. And the real loser in all of this redistricting is the feeling that voters' votes matter at all. You know, if politicians are picking the voters rather than the other way around, then it has a way of disenfranchising voters.
EJ, can you imagine Governor Newsom in California saying, well, if Texas isn't going to do the redistricting that we reacted to, I guess we would just go back to the map we were planning on using before?
Well, that's a very good question, Robert, for the following reason. In the original version of the California proposal, there was a provision that said if Texas goes back, we'll go back. That provision, as I understand it, was taken out 3 days before they passed it and put the referendum on the ballot. And so you couldn't take it back, and it was approved by the voters. So you couldn't take this back in time for the next election. So no matter what, unless the courts throw it out, and the Republicans, of course, are suing California, you could have a circumstance in which courts throw both of them out, or one but not the other, and we'll see where that all ends up before the election. But as Tam said, you could have a circumstance in which Trump's push actually net helps the Democrats if the Texas plan goes out. I think there's one other factor, which is there's a great term I've always loved called the dummy mander. And a dummy mander is when people draw a gerrymander to help their party. But to do that, they've got to cut their party's margins in various districts so they win more districts. They want their opponents to win a few districts by a huge amount, and they want to win a lot of districts by a small amount. If you get a wave election where one party really wins by a lot, then a lot more districts become vulnerable for the incumbent party. And so I think there is a sentiment, and I guess Indiana pulled back from redrawing its lines recently. I think there is a sentiment in part of the Republican Party saying, we don't want to weaken our candidates. We don't want to weaken our incumbents, because if anything like what happened in Virginia and New Jersey happened nationally, and with that 14 points that Tam described in the poll, a whole lot more Republicans could be vulnerable. I wish we could have a national law that said all of this was done in a nonpartisan way, but that doesn't seem to be in the cards.
Do you think it's possible we could have a new National Voting Rights Act that actually did address things like that and did require commissions?
This was part of, the Democrats had a pair of bills, a voting rights bill and a bill to kind of make elections, make it easier for people to vote, basically. And there was a provision in there, but that bill didn't get through the Senate filibuster. I think if Democrats took power with majorities that could hold, it had the presidency in both houses of Congress, I think it would be possible to pass that sort of provision, but we'll have to wait and see if that happens again.
I just want to ask Abby Joseph Cohen something. You spoke earlier about perhaps the regulations could be loosened for the biggest financial institutions. Which are you more concerned about, the biggest financial institutions or the not so big financial institutions?
The not so big financial institutions, Robert, for two reasons. First of all, the regulations for the big ones have already been tightened, and they are dramatically tighter than they are for small and mid-sized institutions. That's one reason that they could be loosened up perhaps at this point. The second reason is that the large institutions have very large compliance teams and other groups that study what we call counterparty risk. That is, are the loans they're making, is the capital that they're providing to other institutions, is it going to safe hands? Small and mid-sized institutions don't have that flexibility. They therefore could have more counterparty risk. So when I look for where we could have some problems in the next financial crisis, if it's coming, I don't think it starts with the large entities. I think it's more likely to happen for some of these smaller entities that don't have the same sort of strong internal infrastructure.
I have a question for, I guess it's mostly for our Washington folks, which is, what's the likelihood of our having another government shutdown in January, I guess, or the end of January, after the weeks that have been paid for with the last shutdown are done? Tam, is it possible? Can you imagine another one?
I could imagine another one. The sort of underlying lack of trust that Democrats have in the Trump White House to even follow what is set out in an appropriations bill, uh, that hasn't gone away. It hasn't gotten better. It is still a really dramatic problem. The lack of trust. The head of the Office of Management and Budget, Russell Vogt, has said in public that he believes that appropriations bills are merely a ceiling and not a floor, and that they could choose just to eliminate whole programs or things that Congress said money should be spent on, that they don't have to do that. And that view is creating just a really huge distrust between Republicans and Democrats in Congress, especially in the Senate. That said, this government shutdown was extremely painful. It was very painful, and I think that there may be a reluctance to go through it again, especially given that there wasn't a particular political win that came out of it for, well, anyone. So the one other thing I would add is that this deal that ultimately did pass included full year funding for SNAP benefits, for the food stamp program, and for several other parts of the government, full year appropriations, which means if there were another shutdown, it actually would be less painful.
EJ, I'll ask you. Does Senator Schumer have a future as leader of the Democratic Party in the Senate?
I think he has a future, certainly to the end of this Congress. As somebody told me when I asked them the question up there, who really wants this job at this moment? And is there any evidence that somebody could do the job, not the job of maybe making arguments to the country, which tends to be the job of presidential candidates and the like, but who could manage the Democratic majority and get some victories? Who could do that better than Schumer? And there aren't a lot of people who think there is an obvious person for that. I think it becomes interesting if Schumer's term, by the way, isn't up until 2028. So he's in the Senate now for until at least then, and he'll make a decision about whether to run for re-election. If the Democrats actually win the Senate it's a long shot in 2026. If they actually were to take the Senate, I could see two ways on this. On the one side, if they do take the Senate, it'll be because of a lot of work by Schumer, a lot of fundraising by Schumer, a lot of strategizing by Schumer, and he might get credit for it. On the other hand, it becomes a much more interesting job to be the majority leader, although it's still the majority leader with Trump as president. So my guess is that the fight over the leadership of the Senate probably doesn't really get joined until 2028. So I'd put my money on Schumer's survival. But there is this discontent in the party about fighting back against Trump. Could I just make one quick point from some polling? And this is a challenge for Democrats. Democrats have the problem of being a very diverse party politically. There was a poll by PRRI that my colleague Bill Galston and I at Brookings were also involved in. And you found, as you always do this, as you have recently, this very high disapproval rating of the Democratic Party at 60%. And even people saying they'll vote Democratic say they disapprove. There are two interesting things when you ask the next question, which is, why do you disapprove? You saw the philosophical diversity of the party. 21% of Democrats said the party was too far left. 29% of Democrats said the party is not progressive enough. And so that gives you a sense of the internal argument. But the biggest number is 63% said they are not fighting Trump hard enough. And that is the longing across the party. The shutdown was an effort to answer that. But it's not clear to me that Democrats want to have that experience again. I think they're going to find other ways to do it. And again, I think that's why that Epstein vote was politically important, because it allowed Democrats around the country, among other things, to say, the Democrats actually fought and won something and divided the Republican Party.
I'd just like the record to show that if Senator Schumer vacates the Senate leadership, and then when President Trump leaves the White House, I think that will finally be the moment when not your cohort, Tam, but the rest of the baby boom generation will finally exit the stage of leadership in our national life. I once calculated that Donald Trump, Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, Al Gore, Hillary Clinton were all born within about 2 years of each other, and I'm not sure. I think Mitt Romney may have been in there too. I forget where he fit. Then we've had a couple of presidents. We've had Joe Biden, who was older than the baby boomers. But for Barack Obama, baby boomers and older, have been in the White House from 1981 until 2025, which is an astonishing performance by, as they used to say, the demographic pig in a python that is the baby boom generation.
Yeah, poor Gen X has barely got any juice, and then they're going to get passed.
And there will be cheering across the country among millennials and Gen Zers when this day comes. I also think, as a New Yorker, it's also so significant how much of the national leadership right now comes from Brooklyn or Queens. I'm not sure that'll happen again anytime soon.
I do want to just amplify something that EJ said, which is that the problem Democrats have in terms of approval is Democrats. The Democrats approve of the Democrats. The reason that President Trump has this fairly solid so far floor at somewhere around 40% is because he's got all the Republicans in line, but Democrats are mad at the Democrats.
60% are negative on Democrats in this poll, 57% are negative on Republicans, but 22% of Democrats are unfavorable toward their own party, only 13% of Republicans. So yeah, it is this fight that Democrats like to have each other, which you led with, Robert, and we're right to do so.
Yes. It could also be that some of the negative view of the Democratic Party by Democrats has to do with the loss of the last presidential election, which
100%.
was not a graceful job by the Democratic Party. I once read an analysis of why the neoconservatives were so important in the George W. Bush administration after 9/11, and the argument was not the strength of their ideas, but the fact that they were a group of people who had some ideas. And George Bush desperately needed some way of dealing, and that included intellectually dealing with the U.S. response to 9/11, and the neocons happened to serve that purpose. And I wonder whether the Democratic Socialists or the Democratic Progressives are in a position to play a similar role. That is, it may not be the quality of their ideas, but the fact they seem to have a lot of them, and they seem to have an agenda. I don't know, Abby, what do you think?
As the native New Yorker who still lives in New York, I would say that we have a test case right in front of us in terms of Mr. Mamdani. And we'll see how things go. And I disagree a bit with a comment that was made earlier about Mamdani focused in on affordability and not really other issues. On the economic front, he spoke a lot about shall we call it taking away from the rich, giving to the poor. Very much a Robin Hood approach, that is to take the nation's most progressive tax system and make it even more progressive. That is not middle of the road stuff. And it remains to be seen whether his economic policies are in fact effective.
Yes, when you say the most progressive, I mean
from a tax standpoint,
the biggest businesses and the richest people in New York pay a huge share of the city's tax burden.
Correct.
I think you're right about Mamdani. Mamdani will do a world of good for democratic socialism if he's an effective mayor, if the city is better off. And I think he's well aware of that. I think it's very significant that he just announced recently that he is renaming the current police commissioner, Ms. Tisch, Jessica Tisch, who's very popular in the city, and it's a real signal that he gets that he does not want to be a mayor who presides over a higher crime rate. On the economic stuff, we will see how he does this balancing act between the spending he would like to do. The most expensive program he has is one of the most popular, which is universal child care. But that is a very expensive program, and how he pays for that is going to be a big deal. That is where he needs revenue, and that is where he proposes to get more money out of the wealthiest New Yorkers.
Yeah,
Yes.
the estimate from neutral sources is that that program could cost something on the order of $8 to $12 billion. And there just is not that much left.
I've seen it
from
closer
the
to
goose.
6, but that's still
No,
a lot
those
of money.
Six presumes all kinds of things that are not likely to fit the bill. There's also a number of things that he has proposed that require approval from the state of New York.
Yeah.
And we'll see if the governor.
That's why I don't think he's going to get them, because I don't think Governor Hochul wants to raise taxes in her election year. So there's going to be an interesting negotiation between Mamdani and Hochul and the Democrats who control the state legislature. But just on your broader point, Robert, defeat can be a moment of intellectual creativity in political parties. I think you saw it on the right in the 70s leading up to Ronald Reagan. And I think you saw it in the center of the party, especially leading up to Bill Clinton. I think you're seeing some of it on the left right now, but I think also the sort of middle of the party or center left of the party understands that this is a moment where they too have to sort of get their act together. And the fact that Trump is so radically changed institutions in the country, I think anybody on the other side of politics has to acknowledge that they can't just come in and saying, we'll restore the old stuff, because that sounds kind of reactionary. I think it's too bad that Joe Biden used the slogan, because what's really required is build back better. I think, we do want to restore a system of foreign aid, but we want to do it better. We want to restore things, but in a form that's better than they were before. And I think that's going to be the challenge to policy people over the next few years.
I have a question about restoring things for Abby Joseph Cohen. The president's tariff authority is before the Supreme Court, and it's possible the Supreme Court will simply defer to president, but this one seems to be a little bit pretty clear what the Constitution says. If in fact the court rules that president doesn't have the tariff authority, there have to be true emergencies, which amount to things like invasions or whatever. How big a project is undoing the taxing that the tariffs have done so far this year?
It would be an immense kerfuffle. First of all, we've always had tariffs, targeted tariffs, and those have been fine. What has been unusual about the Trump tariff scheme has been that they have been so blunderbuss. And even with the cutbacks from those ridiculous numbers that were announced in April, we're still looking at an effective tariff rate right now in the United States of 18 percentage points, 18%, which is only 15 or 16% above where we were. So this is very problematic. We don't yet know, of course, what the court will say, but if they do roll it back, the questions have to do with, will companies get rebates, number one? And number two, who will get the rebates? Because many companies, the large companies in particular, were effective in saying, I'm not paying those increased tariffs. They pushed the cost up the supply chain or to some of their intermediary distributors and vendors. And so that's where the money may in fact end up. But it could be very confusing. I would basically say that the tariff policy writ large that we have seen, even though I believe there is typically a place for very targeted tariffs when there has been unfair trade practice applied against us, the tariff policy we've seen in this administration has been poorly conceived. And I have to say, something that we would be better off without having, quite frankly. And I haven't even mentioned the fact that it's been erratic.
Yeah.
Companies don't know how to respond to good policy or bad policy when it's erratic.
Abby Joseph Cohen, E.J. Dionne, and Tamara Keith, thank you. Thanks to all three of you for taking part in this discussion. I could sit and listen to all of you for hours talk about these things. Many thanks also, by the way, to Joshua Plout and Ronnie Giuliano of the American Friends of Rabin Medical Center, which produces Global Connections, and also to our technical director, Bobby Grandone. Our program sponsor is the American Friends of Rabin Medical Center. It's a 501c3 national charitable organization. It represents, in the United States, Israel's largest hospital, Rabin Medical Center in Petach Tikva. That's in Greater Tel Aviv. The website is www.afrmc.org. At this critical time, we'd like you to consider a donation to AFRMC's Emergency Medical Relief Fund to help Rabin Medical Center in Israel as it treats wartime casualties, including returning hostages. You can donate online at the website, which is, once again, www.afrmc.org. Join us for our next program, What's Next for Israel and the Middle East, in 2026, with guests Aaron David Miller, Ambassador Dennis Ross, and Raith Alomari. I'm Robert Siegel, and this has been Global Connections, Navigating the New Normal. See you next month. Stay healthy and stay safe.